January 2025, in a ceremonial hall inside a Capitol building far north of Jerusalem, two heads of state signed a document, a 20-year strategic partnership treaty, 47 articles, military cooperation, defense coordination, counterterrorism, cybersecurity, joint opposition to what both nations call Western influence. The signing ceremony lasted 11 minutes. The document will govern their relationship for 2 decades. The implications extend much further. This alliance is not new in concept, but it is new in formality. 2 nations, one with Orthodox Christian heritage, one Shia Islamic, have formalized a military partnership. One is European in orientation, the other is Middle Eastern. They share no common language, no common border, no common history of friendship, and yet 47 articles of cooperation, and they're not alone. A third nation, technically a Western military ally, has been quietly cooperating with both through a diplomatic process since 2017. That same nation has vetoed Israel's participation in Western military exercises. Multiple times, 3 nations, 3 different religions, 3 competing interests, yet all 3 share one thing: a strategic presence north of Israel. Here's what stopped me cold. 2,600 years ago, a Hebrew prophet in Babylonian exile wrote down a vision of a specific military alliance, coming from the north, targeting Israel, led by a figure called Gog. And the prophet didn't just describe the direction of attack, he named the nations involved, by name, ancient names, unfamiliar to modern ears: Magog, Rosh, Meshech, Tubal, Persia, Cush, Put, Gomer, Beth Togarmah. For centuries, scholars debated what these names meant. Then maps were overlaid, histories were traced, tribal migrations were documented, and the names began to resolve into geography, modern geography. The question writes itself: how did Ezekiel identify, by name, the exact nations now forming military alliances against Israel, 2,600 years before those alliances existed? To answer that, we need to examine a prophecy so specific that its precision becomes uncomfortable. Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 sit in an unusual place in Scripture. They follow chapter 37, the Valley of Dry Bones, the prophecy of Israel's national restoration that we examined previously. The sequence matters. First, Israel is restored to its land. Then, a massive invasion comes from the north. This sequence matters because it establishes preconditions. The invasion described in chapters 38 to 39 cannot occur until the restoration described in chapter 37 has taken place. For most of history, that made the prophecy seem hypothetical. Israel didn't exist as a nation. There was nothing to invade. That changed in 1948. The prophecy opens with a direct command: Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Ezekiel 38:2. 4 names in one verse: Gog, Magog, Rosh, Meshech, Tubal. Let's slow down. Each one matters. Gog is not a place, it's a title. Like Pharaoh for Egypt or Caesar for Rome. Like Tsar for Russia or Sultan for the Ottoman Empire. A ruler, a leader, someone who commands the coalition. The word may derive from a root meaning high or elevated, suggesting a figure of significant authority. Magog is his land, his territory, his base of operations. Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal are additional territories under his authority or allied with him. So we have a leader, a homeland, and a network of aligned regions. That's the structure. Now for the geography. But here's where it gets complicated. These names appear in Genesis 10, the Table of Nations, as descendants of Japheth, Noah's son. Japheth's descendants migrated north and west from the Middle East after the flood. They settled in regions we now call Turkey, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and beyond. I used to think this was academic trivia. Then I started tracing the migration patterns. Let me walk through each name carefully. The identifications I'm about to share aren't fringe theories. They come from ancient historians like Josephus, geographic records, and linguistic analysis. First-century Jewish historian Josephus identified Magog with the Scythians, nomadic warrior tribes who lived in the regions north of the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. Josephus wrote in his Antiquities of the Jews, Magog founded those that from him were named Magogites, but who are by the Greeks called Scythians. The Scythians were known throughout the ancient world as fierce horsemen and formidable warriors. Greek historians described them with a mixture of fear and fascination. That territory today includes southern Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and parts of Central Asia. Biblical scholar Daniel Block notes that Magog represents the archetypal enemy from the remote north, a threat from beyond the familiar boundaries of civilization. This is debated. Some translations render it chief prince, treating Rosh as an adjective meaning chief or head. Others translate it as a proper noun, Prince of Rosh, treating it as a place name. The Hebrew grammar supports both readings. Scholars have argued this point for centuries. But here's what's interesting. Ancient Assyrian texts from the 7th century BC reference a people called Rashu or Reshu in the same northern regions. Byzantine Greek sources from later centuries mention Rosh as a people group north of the Black Sea. The phonetic similarity to Russia has led many scholars to suggest a connection, though this remains debated among academics. What's not debated? The direction. Ezekiel 38:15 says explicitly that Gog comes from the remote parts of the north. If you draw a line directly north from Israel, you pass through Turkey, cross the Black Sea, and arrive in Russia. These appear together frequently in Scripture. Josephus identified Meshech with the Moski, a people who lived in what is now eastern Turkey and the Caucasus region. Tubal corresponds to the Tibareni, also in central Anatolia. Both names trace to territories in modern Turkey. Watch that, it becomes important. No mystery here. Persia is Iran. The name was officially changed from Persia to Iran in 1935, but the territory is identical. Ezekiel names Persia explicitly as part of this coalition. The identification is not debated. The geography is exact. Persia is named. Persia is in the coalition. Cush is often translated as Ethiopia, but that's misleading. In Ezekiel's geography, Cush referred to the land south of Egypt, modern Sudan. Put is Libya, the territory west of Egypt along the North African coast. Genesis 10:3 identifies Gomer's descendants as settling in the region of Anatolia, modern Turkey. Some scholars extend Gomer's territory into parts of Eastern Europe, but the core identification points to Turkey, literally, House of Togarma. Togarma was Gomer's son, and his descendants settled in the far reaches of Anatolia, Eastern Turkey, possibly extending into Armenia. Now step back and look at the map. 3 names point north: Magog, Rosh, and parts of Gomer, corresponding to regions north of the Black Sea and into Central Asia. 2 names encircle the Mediterranean: Cush to the south, Sudan, and Put to the west, Libya. 4 names cluster in Anatolia: Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Beth Togarma, all tracing to modern Turkey. 1 name stands alone in the east: Persia, Iran, a coalition from multiple directions, surrounding Israel geographically. A word of caution here: ancient tribal maps don't function as modern political forecasts. The identifications show pattern, not prophecy of specific governments or leaders. Now let's look at what the text says about this coalition. I will turn you around, put hooks into your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Ezekiel 38:4. The imagery is striking. Hooks into your jaws, like a fish being pulled against its will, like an animal being led where it doesn't want to go. The coalition doesn't invade by choice. It's drawn, compelled. maneuvered into position by forces beyond its control. I thought that was poetic language. Then I started observing geopolitical patterns. The northern power didn't plan to become an ally of the Persian state. Their relationship was cool for decades, competitive even. They backed different factions in multiple regional conflicts. But international sanctions changed the calculus. Regional wars changed the calculus. Circumstances pulled them together. Not ideology, not affinity, not shared vision. Strategic necessity. Neither planned the partnership. Circumstances compelled it. Hooks in the jaw. Persia, Ethiopia, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets, also Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the remote parts of the north with all its troops, the many nations with you. Ezekiel 38 5-6. The text lists the coalition members, then adds a phrase that expands the scope, the many nations with you, not just the named participants, additional allies, unnamed partners in the invasion. After many days you will be visited. In the latter years you will come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Ezekiel 38:8. Watch the description of the target. The land that is brought back from the sword, a nation restored after devastation, gathered out of many people, a population ingathered from multiple nations, against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste, a territory that was desolate but is now inhabited, brought forth out of the nations, a people extracted from their dispersal, they shall dwell safely, a nation living in relative security. This isn't describing ancient Israel. The northern kingdom fell to Assyria in 722 BC. The southern kingdom fell to Babylon in 586 BC. This describes a future restoration, a nation regathered, a land repopulated, a people returned from global dispersion. That happened in 1948 and continues today. When does this invasion occur? The text gives several markers. In the latter years, Ezekiel 38:8, Hebrew, Bacharit Hashanim, the end of years, the final period. This isn't describing something in Ezekiel's near future. It points to the eschatological horizon. After many days you will be visited. The invasion comes after a long interval, not immediately after the restoration but following an extended period. You will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Ezekiel 38:11. Here's where ancient text meets modern reality. In Ezekiel's day, every city had walls. Walls meant protection. No walls meant vulnerability. But the prophecy describes a future Israel dwelling without walls. Modern Israel has no city walls. Its defense comes from technology, Iron Dome, David's sling, arrow systems, not from stone fortifications. To take plunder and to take booty, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited, and against a people gathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. Ezekiel 38:12. The motive is economic, resources, wealth, strategic position, the midst of the land, literally, the navel of the earth in Hebrew, a strategic center point. Israel sits at the junction of three continents, Europe, Asia, Africa. It controls key shipping lanes through the eastern Mediterranean. Since 2009, Israel has discovered massive natural gas reserves offshore. The Leviathan and Tamar fields alone contain an estimated 35 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. These discoveries transformed Israel from energy importer to potential energy exporter. Pipelines to Europe are being discussed. Competitors, including Russia, which depends on energy exports, have obvious interest in that not happening. The motive for invasion is becoming clearer every year. Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish and all their young lions will say to you, have you come to take plunder? Have you gathered your army to take booty, to carry away silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, to take great plunder? Ezekiel 38:13. Not everyone joins the invasion. Some nations stand aside and merely question the coalition's motives. Their response is diplomatic, not military. Sheba and Dedan are ancient names for regions in the Arabian Peninsula, modern Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. The Abraham Accords in 2020 began normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab nations. Saudi Arabia has been moving in similar direction, cautiously, but in a documented trajectory. If the Gulf states align with Israel economically, they would stand aside from any northern coalition, not participating, perhaps protesting, but not joining. Tarshish likely refers to a distant Western maritime power, possibly Spain, Britain, or a broader Western commercial network. The young lions of Tarshish has led some interpreters to see Britain and its former colonies, the United States, Canada, Australia, as possible identifications. These don't participate in the invasion. They protest, diplomatically, weakly. That dynamic, military alliance by some, diplomatic objection by others, reflects documented geopolitical patterns. What happens to the invasion? This is where the prophecy turns. The text records a direct statement, "And it will come to pass at the same time when Gog comes against the land of Israel, says the Lord God, that my fury will show in my face." Ezekiel 38:18. The text describes the invasion as a personal offense, not merely geopolitical, but theological. "For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath I have spoken." Ezekiel 38:19. Then comes the description of intervention. "Surely in that day there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel, so that the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, the beasts of the field, all creeping things that creep on the earth, and all men who are on the face of the earth shall shake at my presence." Ezekiel 38:19-20. The text describes seismic disruption, global impact, creation itself responding. "I will call for a sword against Gog throughout all my mountains. Every man's sword will be against his brother." Ezekiel 38:21. The prophecy describes confusion within the coalition, friendly fire, internal collapse, armies turning on each other. "And I will bring him to judgment with pestilence and bloodshed. I will rain down on him, on his troops, and on the many peoples who are with him, flooding rain, great hailstones, fire, and brimstone." Ezekiel 38:22. The text describes natural catastrophes targeting the invading force: disease, torrential rain, massive hail, fire from the sky. Whether these represent supernatural events or natural phenomena, the text doesn't specify the mechanism. What it does specify: the coalition is destroyed. "Thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations. Then they shall know that I am the Lord." Ezekiel 38:23. The stated purpose is explicit. The text frames this not as random destruction, but as demonstration. According to the prophecy, nations that dismissed divine involvement in history are forced to reconsider. Chapter 39 continues the description. "You shall fall upon the mountains of Israel, you and all your troops and the peoples who are with you. I will give you to birds of prey of every sort and to the beasts of the field to be devoured." Ezekiel 39:4. The defeat is total. The casualties are catastrophic. The text describes birds and beasts consuming the fallen. The imagery is graphic, deliberately so. This is not diplomatic resolution. This is military annihilation. "Then those who dwell in the cities of Israel will go out and set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and bucklers, the bows and arrows, the javelins and spears, and they will make fires with them for 7 years." Ezekiel 39:9. 7 years of fuel from captured weapons. Some interpret this literally, weapons made of combustible materials. Others suggest it describes the economic benefit of captured military resources. translated into Ezekiel's frame of reference. Either reading yields the same implication. The spoils of failed invasion sustain Israel for years. It will come to pass in that day that I will give Gog a burial place there in Israel, the valley of those who pass by east of the sea, and it will obstruct travelers, because there they will bury Gog and all his multitude. Therefore they will call it the valley of Hamon-Gog. Ezekiel 39:11. Hamon-Gog means multitude of Gog, a mass grave renamed to commemorate the destruction. The burial takes 7 months. Ezekiel 39:12. 7 months to bury the dead. This is not a skirmish. This is catastrophic defeat involving casualties so numerous that burial requires half a year. The text describes professional teams searching the land, marking remains for collection, a systematic cleansing process, a valley renamed, a permanent geographic memorial. So the house of Israel shall know that I am the Lord their God from that day forward. Ezekiel 39:22. According to the text, the result is recognition, a nation that witnesses protection in terms the prophecy describes as unmistakable. The event becomes a turning point in Israel's understanding of its own history. Now step back. We have a prophecy written in the 6th century BC. The text describes a coalition from specific geographic regions, identifiable by ancient tribal names, an invasion of a restored Israel, one that had been devastated and then repopulated, a motive of economic gain, resources and strategic position, intervention through natural catastrophes, destroying the invaders, a global witness, nations reconsidering their assumptions, compared to observable patterns. Nations from the regions Ezekiel named have formalized strategic partnerships. Cooperation frameworks have emerged between historically competing powers. Israel has discovered significant energy resources that alter regional economic calculus. The geographic alignment described in the prophecy corresponds to documented geopolitical formations. No ancient map is a modern newspaper. Prophecy describes patterns, not schedules. But a convergence is observable. Nations that had no historical reason to align are aligning. A country that didn't exist in 1947 sits at the center of documented regional tensions. The specific regions Ezekiel named, by their ancient tribal designations, correspond to documented sources of strategic pressure. That's either a notable pattern or something else. Honest investigation requires addressing objections. Some scholars argue that mapping ancient tribal names to modern nations involves guesswork. Fair point. Not every identification is certain. Ancient tribal boundaries were fluid. Migration patterns shifted over centuries. But consider, Persia is Iran. That identification is not debated. The name changed in 1935, but the territory is identical. Kush is Sudan, the land south of Egypt. Put is Libya, west of Egypt. Both identifications have broad scholarly support. The core identifications have strong historical foundation. The peripheral ones involve more interpretation, but the overall pattern holds. Some argue Ezekiel 38-39 describes an invasion that already occurred, perhaps during the Persian, Greek, or Maccabean periods. The problem: no such invasion matches the description. The Persians under Cyrus were allies, not enemies. They authorized the Jewish return. The Greeks passed through but did not invade a restored Israel dwelling in peace. The Maccabean conflicts were regional struggles, not coalitions from the far north. There's no historical record of an invasion matching Ezekiel's specific details. Some interpret Gog and Magog as symbolic representations of evil rather than specific nations. Revelation 20 does use Gog and Magog symbolically, but Ezekiel's version is geographically specific. He names tribal groups. He describes terrain, the mountains of Israel. He references the remote parts of the north. Symbolic interpretation doesn't easily account for this geographic precision. Coalitions shift. Today's partners may be tomorrow's rivals. True, the nations involved have competing interests. The alliance is tactical, not ideological. But Ezekiel doesn't describe a permanent alliance. He describes a coordinated invasion, temporary alignment for a specific purpose. That's precisely what documented patterns show. Nations with conflicting long-term interests cooperating tactically when they share a common target. What does this mean for investigation? There are things the text states explicitly. Ezekiel 38:39 describes a future invasion of restored Israel by a coalition from specific geographic regions. Those regions correspond to documented nations, with varying degrees of certainty and identification. The prophecy has not been fulfilled in recorded history. The documented geopolitical landscape shows formation of alignments among the regions Ezekiel named. There are things that remain uncertain. The timing. Latter years gives direction, but not dates. The sequence. How this text relates to other prophetic material. The mechanism. Whether the described intervention operates through observable or unobservable means. These uncertainties don't invalidate the pattern. They reflect appropriate limits of prophetic interpretation. Prophecy describes patterns, not schedules, but something transcends academic debate. A text written 26 centuries ago identified specific regions that would align against restored Israel. For most of that history, the prophecy seemed geographically impossible. Israel didn't exist as a nation, and the named regions had no unified interest. In 1900, there was no Israel. The Ottoman Empire controlled the region. In 1950, Israel was 2 years old. The named regions had competing interests. In 2000, the named regions were still largely unaligned. In recent years, the convergence accelerated. Now Israel exists. Now those regions show documented cooperation. Now the ancient names resolve into observable geography. The question isn't whether the pattern exists. The question is what the pattern means. And that question leads to another one, which Ezekiel also addressed. In the next video, we examine what happens after the invasion Ezekiel describes, because the prophet didn't stop at chapter 39. Chapters 40 through 48 describe something else entirely, something that changes the entire framework. If this pattern made you reconsider the text, leave one word in the comments. Which identification surprised you most? And what does the convergence suggest to you?